Hello everybody and welcome to another Flux event. In this session, we describe the differences between Flux Copilot and ChatGPT. The video is timestamped, so feel free to use it to skip to any specific session. Enjoy! Cool. So yeah, while people keep joining, I'm gonna go over what the agenda is. So the idea of this event is we're gonna be covering our launch of Copilot, and we're going to be comparing how that works compared to like plain old ChatGPT. What are the benefits of having Copilot, and like what are some of the workflows that you can use Copilot for? How can it benefit your design process? And we're going to be leaving quite a bit of time at the end for questions. We've had a ton of questions being forwarded to us beforehand. We know that there's going to be a bunch of questions. So if you guys have questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat, and then we're going to cover them after the first introduction is done. Or if someone is ready, you can unmute at the end and ask your questions live, engage in the conversation. That would be great. And kind of the prompt of this event is, I'd love to know if you guys have already tried Copilot, or if you have already tried ChatGPT. And I'd love to know how your experience was. Like what type of questions did you guys ask? How were the responses? So what was your experience with any of those, Copilot or ChatGPT? I'd like to know how that went. Yeah, getting started, I'm gonna do a quick introduction of Flux for those of you that haven't tried it yet, or they are new to the platform and don't really know what this is all about. So Flux is a browser-based electronic design tool, and it's basically built around sort of three main principles. The first one being that we don't want you guys to reinvent the wheel. We don't want you to start from scratch. So as much as possible, we want people to reuse some other people's work. So we have a few different sort of features built in to accomplish that. One is we have a ton of public projects, templates, and projects in general that have been built in Flux that are free and open source for anybody to work on. So there's the feature projects page that you can access from the menu here. And there's a ton of projects there. And you can also search in our search bar for different templates. There's Arduino templates, Raspberry Pis, amplifiers, all sorts of things. So that's one thing. And we also have a public library of parts built in right here in the app. These are parts that are built by the community, and they decided to make them public, so you can use them on your design. There's no need to start building part from scratch, creating a library for yourself. That's kind of covered already, so you can get started much faster. And we also have what we call sub layouts, which basically is reusing a bunch of work, so schematic and components and layout that you can drag as a part to your project. So in this case, if I would search for a sub layout and find the USB-C receptacle, I can drag basically the whole layout, so a bunch of parts already pre-traced and pre-laid out into my design. Again, all this is to try and get you guys started much faster and design speeds be much faster. We're also very big, and we really encourage people to collaborate. Same thing with starting from each other's work, but also sharing projects in Flux is super easy. You can just basically share the URL, and if you give people the right permissions to that project, you can basically just by sharing the URL, anybody else who you give access to will be able to open the project. There's no need to download tools, make sure that whatever tool you download is the right version or anything like that. Just open the browser and you're ready to go. And the third principle, which is what got us here today, which is what we kind of like call stay in the flow. So try to have everything in the tool, so you don't need to go to other tools to accomplish any type of job. So we have a built-in simulator, so you can simulate different spies. Using spies, you can simulate different properties. And last week we launched Copilot, which is what we're talking about here today, which is an AI assistant for hardware design, and it's built in tool, again, to try you to stay within the tool. You don't need to open a bunch of different tools and so kind of break your flow. So once you're here, you can do everything within that tool. So Copilot, some of you might be aware of, some of you not. So I'm gonna also do a kind of like a very quick rundown of what Copilot is. And it's basically an AI assistant that is chat-based. You can ask Copilot a bunch of different questions. It can help you with like anything from simple questions to complex questions. We're going to be covering some workflows and some examples that you can use Copilot for. You can invoke Copilot either in the chat here in the right or by creating new comments in your design. And that brings us to like Copilot, what the differences between Copilot and something like ChatGPT. So the very main difference is that Copilot has context of your project. So being built in Flux, it can understand the context of the project in which you're asking the questions. So what does that mean? Copilot has access to so for now, your schematic, and that includes all the parts, or the list of parts that you have in your project, but also how those parts are connected to each other. So it understands how the different components are connected between themselves to other components. So it understands the net list, let's say so it understands both the part list and the net list, so how they're connected. It doesn't currently understand the layout, so how the traces or how the layout is created, what traces are connected, what traces are not connected, but it fully understands the schematic. So we're working on trying to have Copilot also understand the layout. So that's something that's going to be coming down eventually on the roadmap. We're also working on having Copilot be able to directly edit or modify your design, of course, with your consent. But for now, Copilot is kind of like read-only, let's say. So it can read and understand the context of your project, but it cannot interfere and modify it. So that's something you guys need to be aware of. And yeah, that's kind of like a basic rundown of Copilot. And yeah, again, the main difference is between this and something like ChatGPT is that when you ask Copilot, it understands what the project is all about, and that enables a bunch of different workflows that are not really possible with ChatGPT. For example, like one of those workflows is trying to get learning or understanding. So, for example, in this case, I have a project that I've opened up. Again, some of these examples I'm going to run live. Some of these have been kind of like pre-asked questions, especially because Copilot sometimes takes a few seconds to reply. So otherwise, for every question, I will need to wait, and to keep the event a little bit shorter, I pre-asked Copilot a bunch of questions. But I'm going to do some of you live for you guys to know. So going back to that, the first workflow that Copilot enables that is not really possible with any other AI is asking Copilot about a specific project. In this case, I opened a project and I asked Copilot what this project is about, and it basically answered by understanding what the list of parts is and how they're connected. It answered what that project is all about. It's another example here, where basically the exact same thing, and it's very nice. It's very mind blowing to see how Copilot really understands the context of the project. And this next example is even crazier, at least in my view. So this is the only thing that Copilot can see. And I asked what is this circuit? And you can basically ask that, even say live, Copilot, what is this circuit? And basically it will try to figure that out and give you the answer live. So while that happens, I'm gonna move to this other example, and this one also same thing, trying to understand what circuits is. And this is something that happens a lot in when you decide new hardware, or you're looking at other projects and you want to learn, you're not sure exactly why someone used something specific. So you can go back and ask whoever designed that, but sometimes you don't have access to the person who designed the project. And basically with Copilot, you can say, hey, why is this here? And in this case, I asked Copilot, hey, what is this resistor and this capacitor doing? And it was able to figure out on its own that R2 and C1 are basically a debounce circuit for the push button. And that this one was pretty mind blowing to me, because like you can really understand the whole context, and that opens up a bunch of different possibilities, because you can reply to this thread and say, for example, just kind of as a quick note, every time you start a new thread, you need to tag Copilot in order for it to respond. If you're responding within a thread where Copilot already answered, there's no need to do that. You can just basically type something and it will listen and answer. For example, we can say, how do I size the resistor for a time constant of whatever 10 milliseconds. And let's go back to this project. Yeah, and this is the question that I just asked 2 minutes ago, and it was able to figure out that this is an amplifier, and basically kind of like does a rundown of how things are connected to each other and why all the components are there. And again, like something like this with ChatGPT is not really possible, because it's very hard to give ChatGPT the context of it and describe the project. And this is something that's also very common when you see a project somewhere, is how do you ask someone what that circuit or sub layout or whatever is without sharing a picture? And in here, there's no need to share a picture or anything. Just basically ask the question and it will tell you what that thing is. So doing something similar to the previous example, you can ask something like, do I make sure that this amplifier is properly biased? And it will answer these type of questions. And here, just to remind you, the question that I asked was, how do I size the resistor for a time constant of 10 milliseconds? And it's basically giving me all the math that I need to do. And how do I size my components to do that? And you can ask any type of questions. In this one, I already asked this question here, and it basically gives you the full explanation of how do you calculate. So this is kind of like the second type of workflow that's possible. The first one, again, is learning, asking Copilot why, like what a circuit is, another one is what a specific component is doing in a design. You can ask, for example, what is this push button doing? Or I've done a similar example wasn't this one, sorry. It was a microcontroller example, and there was a part that I only had the part number, and I didn't know what that part was. And I could either copy, paste it, look for the data sheet, see what that part is, and figure it out on my own, or I can ask Copilot, hey, what is this part? And it basically would do that for me. And these things are the things that sort of land within that concept of like stay in the flow. While you're in the tool, you don't need to go out of the tool, go somewhere else, find the data sheet and do something. You can ask within the tool to Copilot, in this case, hey, how do I do this? Or what is this part? Or even how do I connect this part to something else? For example, let's run that test now. I can ask, it's a comment here. At Copilot, what is this? I see. And it will pop up a little window here saying someone is typing when Copilot is about to answer. Yeah, so those are, just to recap a little bit, those are two of the workflows that we've identified. One is asking Copilot for what is something doing. It basically answered me. And the crazy thing is that this is not only a part, this is actually a sub layout. So it was able to go inside the sub layout, see what was happening in there, and come back with the answer of what this part is doing. Basically, flash memory is used to expand the storage capability of my Arduino, which is what it's doing. Yeah, so the first one is learning. The other one is asking Copilot to calculate the value of components. So let's go back and see, where was I? It was here. So how do I make sure that it's properly biased. It basically telling me like all the values that I need to drop, that I need to match. And they can even like continue like following up and say, hey, okay, these are my values now. How do I size my resistor like I did in this case? And it will tell me based on the context of the project, how do I accomplish that? This is much faster than trying to basically type the context of the project and describing that in, for example, ChatGPT and asking, hey, what is this doing? How do I accomplish this or that? Some of the workflows that both tools can potentially do is, for example, when there's no context needed at all, for example, when you're starting from scratch and you say, hey, I want to do something like, or I want to create a project with an ESP32 and a temperature sensor. What components do I need? And we can even run a test like that. So when there's no context at all on the project, both tools will do kind of like a very similar job. Copilot has a bunch of different models that it can rely on to. So it can be, in some cases, it can be a better answer, but you'll see much more similar results when there's no context at all needed. While when the project is moving along, then you're asking questions that will require the context of the project, then things start to be a lot different, and Copilot will do a much better job as we were seeing before, again, because it has the context of what parts you have and how they're connected. So yeah, so some other workflows or examples that you can run are, but I want to create a temperature sensor connected to Wi-Fi that shares the air temperature, or something along those lines. As a little, if you use like someone is typing legend, that it will appear when, basically to let you know that Copilot listened to what you were saying, because again, since it takes a few seconds to reply, sometimes you don't know what's going on. So when you see that, you know that Copilot is going to be answering. A few tips to try and improve your experience when you do try Copilot. Again, this is free, it's open for everybody now. We know it's not perfect. We know that not every answer is going to be correct, but we were basically mind blown by some of the things that it can potentially do. That we said that we cannot keep this to ourselves. We need to share that with the community. So that's why we opened this preview, and we'd love you guys to try it and let us know what worked, what didn't work, what some other use cases you found that we just didn't cover here. Again, these are just some of the ones that we found, and we're barely scratching the surface. So we'd love to see what you guys can come up with. And yeah, like workflows like this, where you ask Copilot for like a head start, like I want to do something like this, like where do I even start? It will give you a bunch of different options of ICs that you can use, sensors that you can use. You can even ask how to connect those, stuff like that. You can ask Copilot for alternatives that have, for example, at lower cost, or alternatives that have a different package, or things like that. You can have a conversation with it. As a tip there, the more open-ended the questions are, usually the less likely you are to get a good response. For example, when you have a universe of thousands of parts that Copilot can choose from, it's much less likely that it's going to choose the ones that are better for you or for your design. So if you're doing those type of questions, try to add requirements as much as you can, either upfront and say, hey, I want to design something like this. I want to be able to measure from this temperature to that temperature. I want to power it using a solar panel or whatever that is. So it has more information to sort of basically have to provide a better answer. And the other tip is you don't need to necessarily do that up front. You can basically ask Copilot for something like this question that I just asked, and like with follow-up questions, say, okay, I want to measure from 0 Celsius to 2 whatever, 50 degrees. Is that sensor, would that sensor work? So you can ask follow-up questions to try and narrow down and eventually get to a list of parts that you can work with. And another workflow example is, and one that we're basically only starting to test. We haven't done like in-depth testing of what it would respond in these type of situations, but you can also ask Copilot to do some more like complex, give you more complex math options and what it can do, what it cannot do. So for example, in this example, the one that's most interesting is the last question here. So we basically ask Copilot, what is looking at, yeah, for example, like if a specific op amp has enough bandwidth to achieve a specific gain or a specific frequency, so go read the data sheet of that specific op amp and give you a response and even how to calculate that response. And some of these we validated with people that like have been designing these type of filters for forever, and most of them are correct. So again, we're only even scratching the surface of what Copilot can do. Yeah, go ahead and test it out and let us know how that goes. Another question that we were blown away by is when Mark here asked, like, what is the noise output at a specific gain? And he basically calculated the whole noise output. And it gave you the interesting things that will give you basically the full breadcrumbs of like how it got to that point. So all the math that it did, and that is great to actually go back and double check if the answer was correct, if the answer wasn't correct. Again, sometimes it is not, and sometimes it is. And something that is good, like a good thing to do is when the answer is correct, like give it a thumbs up, because we use that as a reinforcement to tell our models, okay, these questions were correct, these ones were not. You can type and say, hey, that is not correct. We've seen that happen many times where Father would say something which was wrong. You say, hey, that is wrong for that reason. And the crazy thing is that he will say, oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't take this into account, and this is the correct answer. The good thing is that when something is wrong, it's not that you're lost. You can reason with it and basically get eventually to the right answer. And then last example before we open up for questions. I see a ton of interaction there in the chat, is that you can ask Copilot in basically any language. So we've tried Spanish, we've tried Italian, Portuguese, Ukrainian, Russian. We tried Filipino. Basically, those are the languages that we speak here at Flux. So we try those, but I'm sure that it speaks other languages as well. So we haven't tried every language out there. So if you speak other languages, give it a shot. We can do a quick test in Spanish to see. I'm gonna just basically ask the same question in Spanish. And it will basically answer back in the same language that you asked. So if you ask in English, it will reply in English. If you ask in Spanish or any other language, it will reply back in that same language. Yeah, that's kind of like a quick rundown of what it can do, some of the limitations that it really has. Again, just to recap some of those limitations. It can only access schematic for now. So part list and net list, what parts you have in your schematic and how they're connected. It cannot access the layout just yet. It can read your project, but it cannot write, so it cannot edit, add parts, or anything like that. That's something we're working on. And if you ask Copilot how to do stuff in Flux, it hasn't been yet trained to take a look at our doc. So it will basically look in the whole model, and the answer is not always great. So this is something that we're working on, that we're going to be releasing shortly, to basically to be able to ask Copilot how do you do stuff in Flux directly. So you don't even need to go and look at our docs. Yeah, here's the answer. Same thing. If you ask in English, it will reply in English. If you ask in Spanish or other languages, it will reply in that same language. Yeah, I'm gonna open up for questions. I don't know if we have any in the chat that we're gonna cover, or anybody wants to unmute and ask the question live. Otherwise, I'm gonna take a look at the chat. Or Kerry, you can let me know if there's.
Yeah, we have quite a lot of questions. I've been doing my best to keep up with them. I think one interesting question that we could get into a little bit is someone is asking if we can just prompt Copilot to demo the BOM use case. And one prompt was, can we get it to give us a BOM / maybe a netlist for a microprocessor driving an LED?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can do that. I'm gonna type the microcontroller, STM32. Yeah, it can definitely do that. We've tried that a bunch of times. Like the same thing applies that I was saying before. When you're way too broad in the question, the answer sometimes is not great. When you sort of try to narrow it down, usually get much better results. Yeah, and by the way, we have people here. So some of the devs that were behind Copilot, like building the feature. So if you have any questions for them, and also I've seen Jared answer some of those questions. So if you have questions for them, that's open as well.
Yeah, we have a question here that I want to get into, which is around ChatGPT versus Copilot. I think you talked a little bit about some of the differences, like having access to the netlist and the parts. The specific question is, why was Copilot selected over ChatGPT? So maybe we can go into a little bit more of the differences there. And maybe that's for you, Nico, or for Jared. I'm not sure.
I'm going to take a stab at it, and then I'm going to leave Jared to give more details. The thing there is that ChatGPT is not great to answer every single question out there. What we want is to be able to leverage different models or different ways to answer a question depending on what the question is. Hardware design is kind of graphical at its essence. So the way that you translate that to ask any AI model, that will significantly impact what type of responses you get. So we don't want to limit ourselves to having only one model. We want to be able to leverage different models depending on what the question is, to try and get the better answer that we can possibly have. I don't know, Jerry, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly right at the core of it. And the only thing I guess I would add is one of the things that Copilot does that, for example, ChatGPT doesn't do is bring all of the context that we already have about your project in Flux to the model so that it can better reason about what the answers are. Like, some of the stuff that Nico was showing around asking it to size resistors, or asking it if a class AB amplifier is correctly balanced, or what needs to be done in a particular circuit. Getting that type of answer quickly is something that you can do with Copilot if you're using it from within Flux. Harder to get that kind of answer out of ChatGPT just because of the amount of information you have to give to it. You can get some stuff in there, but I think it's the integration that makes it more powerful. And then again, the other aspect of this, of course, as Nico already mentioned, is that there are many models in Copilot that are sort of collaborating to provide answers.
Yeah, definitely. So I hope that answered the question. I don't know if you have any other questions, anything you have there, Kerry, or should I just go over the chat?
Yes, I mean, in theory, we would be able to generate a prompt to be able to generate a schematic for just anything, like a hello world, right? Or like a, like an LED with a button or something. Is that assumption correct? Or like, would we be able to say, hey, please generate a schematic for an LED with a button, and when you click the button, the LED turns on, something like that?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Could we see that happening? Or
sure. Yeah.
Just see if I answered the question correctly. Like, let me know if I haven't. So right now you can ask Copilot to give you the list of parts that you will need. For example, I just asked that question and gave me the list of parts. I can even ask, how do I connect each part? And it will answer me. It will describe how do I do that. It cannot yet do the physical work of putting the parts and connecting them. So that's what I meant by it's read only. So it can give me and describe what the answer is or what the result is that you just asked. It cannot yet make the designer, but make the schematic for you. I don't know if that answers the question.
got it. Thank you.
We've got some questions here around what types of information in the datasheets Copilot has access to. So for instance, can it read charts and graphs? And if so, what types of things can it infer from that information?
It does not currently. We don't do any, like, it doesn't infer data from graphs in the way that's being described. Like it doesn't read charts, for example, in a data sheet. If the data is available in a tabular format, then in principle that is available. With that said, as Nico alluded to earlier, there are going to be times where Copilot is not 100% accurate with that tabular information. We're working on improving that. But for today, I think what you can effectively assume is that if it's something that you could read out of the data sheet, it's like effectively text information, good chance that Copilot will be able to answer that question for you. And I would encourage you to just try it and see, where it does well. And in areas where it doesn't do as well, let us know. It's really helpful for us as we work on improving the model and building that next set of features to know where it's doing really, really well and in areas where it struggles. So I would encourage you to give it a shot. If it's textual, to sort of recap, if it's textual information, give it a try. It should have access to that type of information, and let us know if things don't meet your expectations.
Yeah, exactly. And to add a little bit more context to, or a little bit more info to that question, I've seen a few cases where I asked for recommendations or part alternatives or stuff like that, and we recommend parts that, for example, would be okay up to a specific voltage. And then when you look at the data sheet of that part, you find out that it's not. And the root of the error is usually that information was available in some sort of like graphical form, so not text to read. So those are the scenarios where sometimes you see an answer that is not correct because the information was not something it could access. Yeah, that's something that I've seen. Interestingly, if you find, or if you feed that data back, say, hey, this is the voltage information or the electrical information of the part that you just said, is your answer still correct? You will basically say, oh, yeah, no, based on this information, no, now this part doesn't work or whatever, which is interesting. It was very interesting to see.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize as part of that like this is our opening bid, right? This is by no means the end of our development in this space, and we expect to be improving this for a long time to come. And I think all the caveats that Nico has pointed out, they all of course apply, and I would encourage you to go kick the tires, see what works well, see what doesn't work well, and let us know on Slack. We're actively working on this. I'm turning the crank every day. Keep us posted with things that work well and things that don't work well.
We got a question here that's, how are we correcting the model if it, for instance, keeps giving the wrong answer to a common user question? I guess I'll just start off by saying, if you do like the answer that it gives you, you can thumbs up it or upvote it or like it or whatever. And that will help tune the model over time. And then, Jared, anything else to add there?
No, that's really helpful for us too. Definitely do that. If you like an answer, thumbs up will help us improve the system over time for sure.
And then can we give our own data sheet to Copilot?
In what form is this data sheet? Is it, if it's a text file?
PDF, it looks like.
If it's PDF, if the PDF is posted somewhere on the internet, then yes. You know what? We should be able to do this. If you want to, feel free to reach out to me on Slack, and I'm happy to talk through how this would work. I think we can do it. If we can't do it today, we can do it soon. So yeah, if you have a need like that, feel free to reach out to me on Slack and let me know what you're after.
I just pasted the link to join our Slack community. I don't know if Ikari already did. He probably already did, but I haven't been following up with the chat just in case. There's a link to join our Slack community. And I don't know, we're basically like running Slack for now. We tried Discord, but we found that Slack worked much better to have conversations. I have another question here that somebody follow up on me directly, so it's not in the chat. And if I understand the question correctly, this is maybe something, Jared, that you can help me out with, is if the project is too big, will Copilot still be able to understand the full context? And what happened if it doesn't?
So let me make sure I understand the question. Is it like basically when a project gets incredibly large, what happens to the context, and what fits in there and what doesn't, and what happens when it is too big? Is that effectively the question?
Yeah, that's what I understand the question is.
Yeah.
It seems that this guy knows how some of these things work. So
yeah, cool. The way that things work right now, there is effectively an upper limit to the size of the project that Copilot can reason about. We are working actively on ways to make that larger, and we have some, I think, good ideas for how we can do that. Right now, we expect things to work generally pretty well up to around, maybe 100-ish individual parts, but it's a little bit hard to say because every part is different. So please take that with a grain of salt. That's not gospel by any means. What happens when the project gets too large is that you will notice today that what will happen is all of a sudden Copilot will sort of seem to forget what it's talking about. So you'll say, hey, can you help me size this resistor? And he'll say, what resistor? What are you talking about? And effectively what's happened is that the project's become too large and he's lost the thread on what's going on. The overall sort of strategy is we try to keep it as useful as possible for as long as possible. As the project gets larger and larger, we try to keep as much of that information in the context as we can. But of course there is like a limit, but we're working on it. If you notice that happening on small projects or in places where you feel like it really shouldn't be happening yet, or something just seems wrong, please just let us know and we'll take a look. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. And that's also a good troubleshooting tip. Because I've seen those type of questions when I was trying big large projects, and that can be a little bit confusing at first. So if you see the answer being, hey, like what are you talking about? What resistor is that? Or like things of that nature, it usually is that you couldn't catch the whole context. So basically saying, hey, I don't know what you're talking about because I don't have the context. You can do kind of like a comparison. It would be the same thing as if you asked ChatGPT, hey, what do I do with R1? It will basically tell you something along those lines, like what what result one, what are you talking about? And that's kind of like a cue to figure out like why having Copilot understand the context of the project is so important, or actually being able to make a better hardware design tool.
Yeah, a kind of funny anecdote is I was kind of trying to test the limits of Copilot a little bit, and I threw out a question in like a really enormous project asking about how to size, I think RN1 was the component, and it answered me about like, oh, RN1 is this human protein that, you know, is useful in decoding this particular, and I'm like, this is no. So just, it had lost the thread. And we're working on that too. You know, again, there's just limitations to how to how this model can reason about extremely large projects, and it's something that we're actively improving. You know, as I said earlier, this is really our opening bid. You can expect it to just continue to get better over time. We're very much committed to that.
Great. So the other question here in the chat, Rushab says, is there a way to break one schematic into two PCBs or the other way around? For modular designs, we break the same project into multiple PCBs many times. I would be interested to see that capability.
I think this is just general Flux question, right? Not
yeah,
specifically about.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what exactly the capability is.
I think it's like a mother-daughter board kind of thing.
Yeah, it could be like that, or it could be similar to sublayouts. I think sublayouts is one way in which you can break your design up into a couple of core modules. That's what daughter boards. Okay. Yeah, I think multi-board design is something that we're looking at in the future. Currently, we're focusing on optimizing the experience for single board designs and sublayouts and things like that. I think that's most of what we have for that topic.
You can create multiple layouts in the PCB editor. I don't think that we spent a lot of time playing with that, so I don't want to speak to how complete that feature is, but it is possible.
Yeah, that's a tutorial that's coming in the pipeline. Yeah, it has a few limitations because it's going to be a bit complex to cover that now, but keep an eye out for the tutorial that we're going to be releasing in the next week or two about multi-layout designs. So what it can be done, what it cannot be done. So just to give some more context to what Jerry was saying, when you, for example, add a few parts to your layout, it's just two resistors here, you have one layout component, and it's possible to have multiple of this. Again, some limitations that we're going to be covering in a tutorial in a week or two. And the other way that something like this can be done is what we mentioned about sub layouts. I have the same example that I used that I showed before. So when I drag these components into the canvas, it might seem that is a part. So it basically, for all intents and purposes, works like a part. But when you open it, it's basically a full layout. And if I right click and open, you can see that it's basically a full design. It's a full schematic with its full layout that basically can be reused in other projects. So what I did in the past with a few projects was to create a bunch of core sub modules, and then basically my full project was 4 or 5 sub modules connected to each other. And because I wanted to also be able to use each sub module separately. And then basically just put them all together in one bigger PCB and connected them. But yeah, that's something that's currently possible. Is there a tree view to see the complete thing? Yes. The tree view is the objects tree here. I assume this is what you're talking about. If you open the sub layout, you'll see everything that the sub layout contains. So yes, you have a tree view or objects tree, which is what we call it.
Nico, since we just have a couple minutes left here, what about next steps for this and for Flux? If you want to talk about our upcoming competition at all?
Yes. So I was just waiting to see if there was any other questions, but I want to cover that. So a few things. Yeah.
I was going to
go
say,
ahead.
yeah, I had one more question. There was a question mentioned by somebody in the chat regarding the optimization of the bill of materials. Optimization in this context, for the optimization of the bill of materials, is it from a financial perspective or from an efficiency perspective?
You can ask for both. So you just basically say, hey, Copilot, I want to make this project, but make the BOM be, or the bill of materials be less than whatever amount, and it will optimize for that. Or you can optimize for availability. You can ask about, hey, like I want all parts to be available in this supplier. You also have supplier availability built in Flux directly, but it depends on what you ask. You can ask those type of optimizations. Again, it's usually get much better answers if you focus on one thing specifically. For example, you say, hey, I want my BOM to be less than this amount, and it will tell you, oh, okay, this part costs this part costs that, and it will tell you if that is correct or not. You can ask something that we've done in the past a few times. Hey, I want a cheaper alternative to this part, and it will look for it and give it to you. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so yeah, we're almost on time. So I wanted to go back to what Gary was saying. So what's coming next? So the very first thing is we'd love you guys to try Copilot, test these use cases, test some other use cases, see what you find the edges. We're already on the very edge of what AI can do in hardware design, but we want to push that. So try it out. For now, it's gonna be free in this community preview. Eventually, it might not. Try it out, see how it's done, play with it, and let us know if you find something great, use cases that we haven't thought of, or something that you think it should be working and it doesn't. We'd love to know. And the other bit is we have a competition running, which is to design a robotic competition. So anything that can be used in the concept of a robot, that could be like actual robots, robotic arms, or components for robotic arms, for example, motor drivers, sensors, and stuff like that. Gary shared the link to the competition, so anybody is interested. We have some great prizes and great judges. So if you want to have your projects be reviewed and in front of leaders in the PCB design community, it's a great opportunity to join the competition. And there's some great prizes as well. Yeah, that's it. That's basically everything that we wanted to cover. If you have any questions, or if you try a Copilot and you want to share or have questions, you have the link to the Slack community in the chat. Feel free to join there, and we'd love to see what you guys can do. All right. I think we are covered. I didn't see any other questions, so we're going to wrap it up now. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for all the great questions. And we're really excited for you guys to try this out. So we'll see you around.
Yeah, join our Slack. Let us know what you think, and hope to see you again in the future.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a nice weekend.